Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and we are about to get groovy this week with the legendary sequel, Evil Dead 2, directed by Sam Raimi and starring the legendary Bruce Campbell, reprising his role of Ash Williams from the original film from 1981. Now, the events of the original film from 1981 are not really directly referenced by any of the cast in the film, but there are lots of nods to the original, as well as several scenes that are pretty much ripped directly from the original film. Like there's a scene similar to the scene in the original where the girl gets raped by the forest, by the trees. There's a very similar scene to that in this film. Also, there's a scene where Ash's girlfriend, Linda, is possessed by the Evil Dead, and Ash takes off her head just like he did with the shovel in the original film. She launches up at him and he knocks her head off with the shovel just like the original film. Yeah, several scenes you'll look a little familiar to you guys, but there's a lot more humor in the sequel, definitely. That's a big part of the sequel, is there's a lot of slapstick kind of comedy injected into the film, whereas the original film was more of a straight-up horror. So with the sequel, we meet Ash Williams again at the beginning, played by the great Bruce Campbell, and he's chilling with his girlfriend Linda, and they're taking a trip to that same old secluded cabin in the woods. Now, why in the blue hell he would return to that same cabin is beyond me. That's why it's kind of hard to look at Evil Dead 2 as a sequel. Like, why would he go back there after all that happened in that same cabin, you know? And he's just so nonchalant about it. He's like, well, I don't think there's anybody there. We're just going to have a grand old time and have a fun weekend with my girl. Everything will be just fine. But anyway, so they go back to that same cabin, and they're having a good time. They're dancing around. His girlfriend's dancing around like a ballet dancer in a little t-shirt. And he gives her a nice necklace, which is referenced quite a bit throughout the film, you know. That it's really symbolic of the film. So Ash and his girl are having a great time, and they stumble upon that original audio recorder that we see right from the original. It looks like the same exact recorder, which he plays, and again, it's the archaeologist Raymond, and he's talking about the Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon. So he starts talking about the evil spirits being released by saying the passages from the Book of the Dead, and guess what? He starts saying the passages in the recording, and that brings about the Evil Dead spirits in the forest. We see the fog coming out, and it's dark, and the trees are coming alive, you know, and start seeing the crazy camera work, you know, that we saw similar to the original. So what happens is the Evil Dead spirit breaks into the cabin and abducts Ash's girlfriend. So he goes and looks in the bedroom, and she's gone. She's like, what the hell just happened? So he goes after her, and then he finds her, and she's possessed. She is now one of the Deadites, the Evil Dead spirit, if you will, possessed by the forest. So yeah, then there's that scene. He goes after her, and he takes her head right off, and what happens is he goes, once he buries her in the middle of the forest. She comes out again. She rises from the grave, and now she's a true Deadite, back from the dead. And her head falls right into Ash's lap, and she bites him in the hand. So after that, it's hilarious. You see her head like bouncing around. He's swinging her head around because she won't let her grip go, biting on his hand. So he's like smashing her head into stuff. It's hilarious. It's comical. It really is. He's like smashing her head against the wall, against anything he can find. So he decides to go out to the woodshed. The old woodshed that we saw in the original with all the tools of the trade. And one of those tools we saw in the original film, that red chainsaw, and that comes into play heavily in this film. So we got a little glimpse of it in the original. In this in this film, it plays a starring role. So he hacks up, he puts his girlfriend's head in a vice, and she tries and plays with his head, by turning back into her real self, and she starts telling him, "Please, Ash, don't do this." And he has to do what he has to do, so he takes the chainsaw and hacks her head right in half. We see the blood splattering all over the walls and everything, and that's what we get in Evil Dead 2. Lots and lots of gore. And lots of comedy, and lots of horror. So what happens is, once he takes care of his girlfriend once and for all, he goes back into that cabin and just try to make some sense of figure out what the hell he's going to do. And he looks into the mirror, and it's hilarious. Like, the mirror version of himself grabs him and "Fine, we just hacked up our girlfriend with a chainsaw. Does that sound fine?" I love that part. So then what happens is, the girl bit him in the hand, so now his hand becomes possessed by the Evil Dead and starts attacking him, like choking him. And it's just hilarious. I love Bruce Campbell's performance. It's so physically demanding. And he does such a great job. It's hilarious, though. You see him grabbing plates and smashing them against his head, punching himself in the stomach, flipping himself over. Amazing physical acting by Bruce Campbell there. And he's like bashing his head against the wall. He bashes a big rock against his head, and that knocks him out. And then we see the hand still moving, and it's like clawing, pulling him over because the hand sees a hatchet on the ground. And it's just awesome camera work, the way you see the hand pulling towards the hatchet. But of course, at the last second, he grabs that chainsaw, and we see the blood splattering all over his face. He's like, "Who's laughing now?" You see the blood splashing all over his face. It's classic horror. I love it. Awesome. So now the hand is loose, and the hand starts running around the house, and you start to think, man, this movie is batshit crazy. It really is. It's over the top. It's zany. It's hilarious. It's horrific, and it's just awesome. So the hand starts messing around them, running away, taunting him, and even gives him the finger at one point. Made me think a little bit about the Addams Family for a second. And the hand gets caught in a mouse trap. So he shoots at the wall, trying to get the hand, with his sawed-off shotgun. And you see the blood, looks like he finally got him, but the whole wall splurs blood out. 1,000 million gallons of blood that turns into green slime. And yeah, this movie is batshit crazy. So at any rate, Ash runs into Annie, who is the daughter of the original archaeologist Raymond, who was on that audio tape. Turns out he actually was the original tenant of that cabin in the woods, along with his daughter and his family and his wife Henrietta, who we meet later on. So she ends up coming back to the house, and she's got with her some of the missing pages from the Book of the Dead, which she doesn't really know what's going on. She just knows her father taught her a little bit about what was going on with the Evil Dead spirits, and she didn't really get into too much detail with her, but she's going to try and make some sense out of it by going back to that cabin and see what she can find out about these evil spirits. So she meets up with Ash, and they also run into this young couple, Jake and Bobby Joe. And because the bridge gets knocked out, much like the original film again, so Annie can't get across to go to the cabin, so they end up taking a trail. Bobby, Joe, and Jake take them on the trail. They decide to help them out for a cost, of course, because money talks. So that's really all Jake and Bobby Joe are about. They just want to get some money from these folks. So they all go to the cabin in the woods and they find Ash. And Ash actually accidentally shoots Bobby Joe with the shotgun through the door because he thinks it's a spirit trying to get him through the door. So then once he goes to the door to find out what happens, the boyfriend, Jake, knocks him out, punches him out. But then what happens is Ash is actually possessed by the evil dead. That happened earlier in the film, actually, when he was alone in the forest when he got stuck because the bridge was out. So he couldn't go anywhere, so nighttime came, and he heard the recording, and that brought about the evil spirits. It conjured up the evil dead, and Ash actually gets possessed at night. And that happens throughout the film. Once the sun comes up, the spirit leaves his body, and it's a really sick effect, actually. His eyes are like white. You don't see his pupils, but then the white disappears slowly and almost looks like milk, like a weird effect. I don't know how they did that effect, but I'd love to hear about it. It's just really cool, because they didn't have CGI back then. But just a really cool effect, and there's a lot of great practical effects work in this film. And I believe Greg Nicotero worked on this film, who worked on Walking Dead and the original Day of the Dead film and lots of classic horror films. So that's just a cool tidbit for you guys. So they gotta work together to take out Ash, So Ash becomes the bad guy for a little while, but the sun starts coming up and he's okay again. So Ash and Annie have to work together to get those pages from the book that are missing, which are down in the fruit cellar. So they go down in the fruit cellar, and down in the fruit cellar is Henrietta, the wife of Raymond, the archaeologist. So what happened is Raymond had to kill her because she got possessed by the evil dead, and he had to bury her in the fruit cellar, and she comes up out of the ground, of course, as an evil deadite, and attacks everyone in the household. And a couple of the other folks get possessed too, and it's hilarious. They float in the air, and they're like, "We are the spirits of what was and shall be again. Dead by dawn, dead by dawn." I love this movie. So they get those pages, they read them, and it opens up a giant portal which takes Ash to a whole other dimension, and leaves the room open for the sequel, Army of Darkness. So that was the third entry in the series, Army of Darkness. They didn't call it Evil Dead 3. I don't know, I guess at that time sequels weren't a very popular thing. They had been milked to death at that point. Nobody wanted to see another sequel to a franchise at that time. So they just released it as Army of Darkness, as if it was a new movie, but it was actually Evil Dead 3. But in any case, run and buy Evil Dead 2 at all costs. Dead by Dawn, folks. Evil Dead 2 is an absolute masterpiece. I give it 2 thumbs up, 2 devil horns up. And thank you, folks, for joining me at the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared.